Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, Wednesday means it's Wildcard Wednesday here in Instant Deck Tech land, and we have a super spicy list to check out today. So decks that are looking to go infinite with turns are kind of a fringe but known thing in Modern. They pop up every now and then. However, today's deck, Bant Turns, brought to us by Shinadu Ibuki, who took it to a top 8 finish in the infamous small Japanese tournament, is a really sweet new take on the archetype. A lot of times those decks are mono blue, but this one is going Bant, and the Bant additions give this deck some really new lines of attack that it didn't have in the past. So a quick reminder before we break down Bant Turns for Modern. If you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So like all turns decks, the main plan of Bant Turns is to get into position where it can cast an extra turn spell 3, 4, 5, 10 times in a row, and then use all those extra turns to win the game. So for this, we have an interesting mix of extra turn spells. Time Warp is just the most efficient way to take an extra turn in Modern. Walk the Eons is a little bit more expensive, but it does have an upside that in the very late game, we can potentially sacrifice some islands to get it back and cast it again. And then Part the Water Veil can give us an extra finisher, but in this deck, exiling, which Part the Water Veil does after we cast it, and none of our other extra turn spells do, is actually a big downside. It works against what our deck is trying to do. So the big problem with these turn decks that we've seen in the past is taking extra turns doesn't start until turn 5. Or 5 mana. So you gotta wait a long time to get going. If you can live until turn 5 in Modern, there's a pretty good chance that you can take over the game, but living to turn 5 in Modern isn't always a given. So this deck goes Bant to essentially speed up the process. So instead of playing counter spells and trying to just survive for 5 turns, this deck is heavily into the ramp spells. So on turn 1, on turn 2, it can play extra mana sources and then get to the 5 mana necessary to start time warping, to start Walk the Eonsing, to Part the Water Veil earlier in the game. This also helps with Walk the Eons because if we have a bunch of Noble Hierarchs and Utopia Sprawls on the battlefield, it's easier for us to sack some islands to buy it back and take another extra turn. Garruk Wildspeaker, one of our biggest ramp spells, only a 1-of though, but it can be a backup finisher. We do need a way to close out the game while we're taking all those turns. And then Courser is sweet because it's not really ramp, but it filters. It gets lands off the top of our deck, which is nice. It can work like ramp if we don't have a land in our hand. It makes sure we have a land drop, and it also gets us to our extra turn spells so we're not drawing useless lands as the game goes along. So the ramp is one of the key things that sets this deck apart. However, the downside of playing all these ramp spells is we don't have as many extra turn spells as a typical turbo turns deck. Normally you see those decks, they have 12, 15 extra turn spells. They're just overloaded on extra turn spells. However, we do have a plan for this. Instead of just having a massive number of extra turn spells, we're planning to use our Time Warps, our Walk the Eons, and so forth, and then be able to reuse them. So one way we can do this is with Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which loots us to find what we need in the early game, eventually flips around, lets us flash back our Time Warps, and as a backup win condition, when we are taking 5 turns in a row, we can ultimate Jace whenever we cast a spell, we're milling our opponent for 5, and then Seasons Past manages to get back not only our Time Warp, but also a Walk the Eon. So that's why it's so important that we're playing extra turn spells that don't exile when they resolve, and why we're playing less Part the Water Veils and some of the more modern extra turn spells that do that, because we want to be able to flash them back with Jace or get them back from the graveyard with Seasons Pass. The rest of the deck, we have Nissa, Steward of Elements, which is our primary finisher. So we can do some scrying, kind of get things set up, do a little bit of ramping as well with the 0 ability, putting lands on the battlefield. But then, after we cast an extra turn spell, eventually in that chain, we're still making our land drops, getting more and more mana, and we can just ultimate Nissa, make some of our lands into huge flyers, 10 our opponent out of nowhere, like the Simic version of of Searing Wind, I believe is the 10-mana burn spell in red. And then we have a couple of counters, Ojutai's Command and Remand. The theme here is counters, it also draws a card. And then Cryptic Command and Giga Drowse. Cryptic, of course, can counter things as well, but these cards can tap our opponent out. Cryptic works like a fog. Giga Drowse is really important when we go to combo off, so if we're afraid of our opponent having counter spells, we can pass our turn. At the end of our opponent's turn, or even on their upkeep, we can just tap them out with Giga Drowse, targeting all their lands with the Replicate effect, and then we don't have to worry about our Time Warps and all that stuff getting countered as we're going through this extra turn loop. Mana base-wise, Fairy Conclave, Treetop Village, backup win conditions. When everything goes wrong, we can go on the Creature Land Beatdown plan during our extra turns. Maikikuru gives us another way of drawing, making sure we keep finding our extra turn spells. In the early game, we could even discard an extra turn spell because we can flash it back or get it back with Seasons Past or Jace. Bunch of fetch lands, some shock lands, and then I don't know about these basics. 2 forests, 2 islands, and 2 snow-covered islands. There is no reason I can see in the deck why you want 2 snow-covered islands. I can't see any reason for it, but maybe it's just like a flavor thing. I don't know. In the sideboard, we pretty much have all hate cards for specific matchups. So Surgical and Relic for graveyards, Blessed Alliance, Condemn for primarily decks like Death Shadow, but Blessed Alliance good against other aggro decks, Rule of Law for Storm, and Snaring Bridge, any sort of creature deck. We can win with Jace Ultimate without actually attacking with creatures, so we can lock our Nissa Ultimates and stuff out of the game and still win. Spreading Seas for Tron Land, Stony Silence for Affinity and Tron, and Kataki also for primarily Affinity, not as good against Tron, but artifact-based decks, and that is Bant turns for Modern. And that's our Instant Deck Tech for today, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.